becoming a mother is this incredible undertaking. It's an epic venture. I don't think there's anything that compares to it, really. I mean, professional, but you can always change your profession if you don't like it after 5 years. Go back to school. But it's just an enormous venture. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel in our modern world, it is being trivialized. Uh, the whole process is being trivialized and almost in a dismissive way. And so, what I thought I'd like to do is this is intended for girls who are looking forward someday to becoming mothers, women who are trying to make the decision, is now the right time? How do I prepare to become pregnant and go through a pregnancy? Women who are pregnant, and then women who have been through they've given birth and now they have this lovely baby.
You want
Okay.
me to start?
Yes, please.
Please,
Okay,
would you? Thank you, Rosita.
sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Rosita Arvigo. I'm a doctor of naprapathy, which is an offshoot of chiropractic from 1907. It was started by a chiropractor, Oakley Smith, who thought that chiropractic was too violent. So he set about to establish a new profession that accomplished the same good goals of normalization of nerve function without doing so much crack and pop. So I had most of my career in Central America, in Belize, a small country on the Caribbean Sea. I specialized in women and children. In the 1980s, I started an apprenticeship with an old Maya doctor, a shaman by the name of Don Eligio Ponti. I was with him for 13 years, and most of his clientele, which reached about 100 people a week, were women. So I had the opportunity to observe an ancient system of women's and children's care. And then my other teacher was Hortense Robinson, a herbal midwife of Belize. And both of those teachers never went to school and could not read or write. So it was a very basic, primordial. I wouldn't call it primitive because it was very, very sophisticated with both of them. So it's a primordial system of healthcare that I was able to observe and to learn and then to eventually incorporate into my own practice. So for the last 30 years, I have been teaching Maya abdominal therapy. We focus on the upper abdomen and the lower abdomen being the pelvis. So since I was a specialist for women and children, I had a great deal of experience in my career with pregnancy, getting pregnant, staying pregnant, postpartum care, and I'm not a midwife. I have by accident delivered 3 babies in my life, but I am a specialist in prenatal, natal, and postnatal care. And then I also take care of children. So now I am mostly retired from clinical practice and I'm teaching my abdominal therapy workshops around the world. And very happy to be here today and have a nice conversation with Linda.
It's lovely. So I started my life wanting to be an artist. I liked studying the human body, how people moved, the relationship between the movement of human beings and the nature around them, and how everything connected up. So I studied in London, and I began teaching in art schools, and I painted, and I earned a living. And I then fell in love and moved to a small cottage on Ashdown Forest, where I was very much amongst nature, but could still get into London to work. I had a daughter whom I observed very, very closely. Long before she was born, the life within me was an amazing experience, and I felt a little disturbed when I found out that I might be sent to a hospital and be attached to various pieces of equipment Whereas from everything that I had studied at that time, it seemed that what someone that I knew very well, I wanted to give them the most lovely experience of actually greeting them physically. So at that time, I looked at Frederick Leboyer, who was a French doctor who was advocating very gentle births where you don't cut the cord until the very, very last minute after the baby's on your breast, and that, of course, you wouldn't need to have any anesthetics if you could breathe your way through to the birth. So in the hot summer of 1976, I gave birth to my daughter in a little cottage hospital, but I basically myself and her father breathed our way to the birth. And I felt so amazing afterwards. When I went into the ward, people said, "How can you look like that?" The other one said, "You look full of energy." They were all exhausted and felt drained. So they weren't with their babies either. At least their babies weren't. Oh, I think the babies were largely in a ward, another ward. And I began to puzzle about this. But then I conceived another child, and while I was pregnant, my partner died, and I was still kind of able to earn a living indirectly through. I renovated antique furniture, so we were surviving, and I thought perhaps we would survive. I was concerned to have a home delivery for Doran, and this happened, and it was very good. But not long afterwards, he appeared to be very, very yellow, in fact, almost immediately. And despite the fact that I was worried about this, nothing happened. I couldn't induce anything to happen until the very last moment when it was quite obvious that he was beginning to have seizures and was likely to be extraordinarily brain injured. Suddenly, they began to tell me this, but before everything was so normal, I was an over anxious mother. So I managed to drive him to the hospital. He had two exchange transfusions. It was a blood incompatibility that hadn't been detected. And not long after that, he had phototherapy. And then I was told he was so brain injured, so seriously brain injured that he would never recognize me. He wouldn't be able to sit up or communicate. And would I like to put him in a home? Because that would probably be the best thing. So this seemed the most extraordinary, presumptuous thing to be asked. And I felt, well, they obviously don't know that much in some ways. So I asked if I could breastfeed him. He was in intensive care, and after bargaining with them, and they said, if you if you give us some of your milk, well, I offered it actually because I had a lot. So that was a bargain. So then he began to breastfeed, and they were astonished that this very seriously brain injured child should be breastfeeding, whereas the other children in the ward who didn't have these problems were not, because they'd simply never given a chance. So then to skip, I began to take him home. I kept him on my body. I was felt that my breathing and my heart rate were doing something for him. I began to see Doran getting better, although he subsequently had whooping cough and kidney failure. From what I was doing with him, which was really keeping him on my body, because I felt somehow my body had a life force that would be helping him. And then I found various other ways of going back in time and recapitulating what would have been normal development in terms of movement. Until I got to the point when I felt I can't do this anymore by myself, even though he had made obviously progress that nobody would have expected. We have to go further. I'd written a book. I sent the copy of my book to the head of cerebral studies at London University College London. He got me in to do a PhD he was very, very interested in the fact that I said what was underpinning the problem was not the brain injury so much, but the fact that the children didn't breathe normally. And then I had read quite a bit in some medical textbooks that had been loaned to me about the diaphragm, and I became more and more intrigued by this organ and began to think to myself, something very central must be driving development. It can't be fragmented. Everything has to be orchestrated, and there is a conductor here, and this organ looks very, very exciting. So I began to look at how the diaphragm developed and the way in which movement of breathing and the baby's movement themselves began to drive blood supply into the diaphragm to its nerves and to its muscular structures. And the more I learned and studied it, the more miraculous this organ seemed, and the more central to all developmental processes, in fact, generally speaking, to our health. And I also realized that if something goes wrong with the diaphragm, if there is something that we call diaphragm dysfunction syndrome, if this appears, then there will be respiratory adaptations. And that these adaptations are also part of the reason for so many symptoms that come on in a later life. So I began to develop a therapy that, as far as possible, began to copy these processes and apply them to children with brain injuries. And later on, since I was also working with hyperbaric oxygen, and I had adults coming from various different reasons for that, and I could see that the respiratory movements were not optimal by any means. And I began to be able to diagnose people by their movement and the way I could see the movement of their diaphragms. And this just led me deeper and deeper into an understanding that developmental processes were epigenetic and that they relied on optimum diaphragm function to allow health and and capacity to flourish. And so that's where I find myself now. Oh, and Doran, of course, runs half marathons and is a painter. And that has become a real help to me in so many ways.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Great to
So,
hear all that.
I remember that you felt the thing that saved Doran's life in the beginning was you simply held him nonstop. He was basically, the two of you were attached. And this is something I believe that's normal in indigenous cultures. And it's something that's simple. We don't need a specialist to teach us how to hold the baby to us. So Rosita, maybe we'll go to Rosita on this. Now, Rosita, you've lived with indigenous people and you've observed, the natural, a form of life that's closer to the natural order. And could you comment on the importance of what Linda discovered, something simple that all mothers can do, which is to maximize the amount of time that the infant is connected to the mother physically?
Right. Well, that skin contact is absolutely essential for a good beginning in life. And it makes perfect sense to me that Linda was able to help her child so much by constant skin contact. So it was an extreme situation and required some extreme measures, which was keep him against you all the time. I know in the Maya culture, women do not leave their child for 2 years. It never left in the care of somebody else, no babysitter until 2 years old, which is why in our community, all parties are family parties because people do not leave their small children with anyone. So if you say no children, you don't have a party. So that's somewhat akin to what Linda was talking about. But from my point of view, the diaphragm is extremely important that it functions properly for digestion and reproduction. That's where we focus on our abdominal therapy. And if the diaphragm is, because it's a muscle and it responds to emotions. So if the person is chronically stressed out, had a very difficult childhood and was never resolved, then the diaphragm holds those emotions and tightens. And therefore, that tightens the arterial blood supply coming from the heart above and below, because the artery coming from the heart goes right through the diaphragm like that. And then the vena cava goes through the diaphragm as well, and the esophagus. So you have those three apertures where those three tubes go through. So when the person is under emotional strain, the diaphragm does that. And so it decreases the blood supply, oxygenated blood, the hormones, all of the things that we need to survive as human beings by about 50% in my experience. And then the venous uptake, which is carrying away oxygenated blood, some amount of waste material from the cells, will also settle because it has this resistance in the muscle that's holding and squeezing the vena cava above. That means that there will be pelvic congestion. And one of the great mysteries of medicine still to this day is chronic pelvic pain in women. And I am absolutely sure it has to do with a tight diaphragm due to unresolved emotions from childhood or from yesterday. And so that the squeezing of the diaphragm prevents the upflow, the movement of the venous blood. And so that blood tends to settle and accumulate in the pelvic floor, and that creates a heaviness in the uterus and all of its component parts, the tubes and the ovaries and all of its 16 ligaments as well. So that's our approach to fertility, as well as all complaints that women have in the nether parts. The diaphragm is essential, and it is the mother organ, I would say.
Linda has often told me this saying that she learned when she was in Africa. There's a saying: "Never argue with a pregnant woman," because you don't want to upset her. And so maybe in addition to this call being useful to girls and young women and mothers and so on, could also be useful to the families, the men, the boys, everybody else, that this is a very important, obviously it's an important time of life, and the mother requires support, not in a self-indulgent way. And this is where I get back to what I was saying perhaps a little earlier, which is that it seems that pregnancy has been trivialized, like, well, work up until the last minute, and then if it's inconvenient time-wise, just induce because you got to get back to work, or the doctor has to go off and make his golf round or whatever. I don't know, whatever they're thinking. So what can be done by women themselves, of course, but also by the people around them to support them during this time? Someone who's disturbed or unhappy or stressed or feeling unsupported is going to manifest physiologically, and it's going to manifest in what the baby gets.
That's right.
In terms, yeah.
Right. I completely agree with you. Modern life is skewered against women and children. Right now, I don't know any mother who doesn't work. And that means that the children, the household, everything is getting short shrifted, and that the mother is overwhelmed, overworked, exhausted, concerned equally about the finances as she is about her children. For me, the only solution is grandparents. Without grandparents in the picture, that's why I'm in Chicago right now, why I'm not home on my farm in Belize, is to help my daughter with her two children who are still in primary school during the summer when they're not in school. So I feel like if a grandparent it's the most important aspect now in modern life for family harmony, that there be that backup and that person who's there when the mother's too busy. So I spend a lot of time with my grandchildren now trying to make up for that absence of their mother, who is necessarily looking after the finances of the family.
I've had my
Gotcha.
for over 20 years, probably coming up 25 years. And in the beginning, uh, a good percentage of mothers didn't go out to work. And and also grandparents lived near
Right.
and helped. Now all the mothers go out to work,
Right.
and their grandparents don't live anywhere near them. Most people are isolated. Those
Mm-hmm.
communities which I was brought up in have gone as people had to travel to get some sort of work. So that makes it more difficult. What happens also is when the blood supply to the diaphragm is reduced, then there is a redirection of connection to the auxiliary emotional respiratory muscle here. And when you start to breathe here, it triggers the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain. So that makes things worse because it creates a vicious circle. The less blood supply is reaching the connections between the limbic system and the rest of the brain to balance your emotional reaction with previous experience and observation, the more stressed that you feel. And since all the internal organs move up and down when we breathe, including, of course, the kidneys, which are in little sacs and move up and down, and the adrenal glands are on top of the kidneys. So if you're having to actually bring in some adrenaline to help you, then if you're a diaphragm breather, you're massaging your kidneys and adrenal glands to restore them. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
breathing up here, you need that adrenaline more and more to function, and you're not helping. So it makes, and also, of course, as you pointed out, if the diaphragm isn't descending properly, then the pelvis doesn't open properly, which also causes problems for hip insertion, and is creates an internal environment in the prospective mother that's not going to be ideal for the child. And because of my previous background as an artist, I observe the physique of the mothers who come to me, and almost all of them have very little distance between the bottom of the rib cage and the pelvis. There seems to be there've been very, very little room to have fitted a baby in there in the
Mm.
first. And many of them you can obviously see are upper chest breathers here. And they tell stories of the levels of stress that they have experienced at different stages in their lives, and it's almost always ramped up over the time of pregnancy. So, and as you so rightly point out, they're very alone in the situation. They have to bear it themselves. When I conceived Lily, I went to natural childbirth classes with her father Peter, and there were other men there, and and they were all giving birth, as it were. And he breathed me through. He was breathing the same way that I was breathing
Mm-hmm.
when he overbreathed, I overbreathed, then we pulled back, and it was the most wonderful experience in my entire life. Mhm.
Right.
Really, really was. Um, so the situation, particularly now, as mothers are of well being vaccinated even before the baby is born, and then the number of vaccinations that are being given to infants in the West is quite extraordinary, and also very, very worrying. So the general and diet is not as good as it was. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and diet used to be very simple. Certainly in the UK, um, after the war, farmers were subsidized. So vegetables, fruit, eggs, chicken, meat, they were all very affordable. And biscuits and cakes were expensive. So you made your own. But now it's the other way around. So there's so many
Mm.
factors
In-
that
You're right.
play into creating
That's
stress.
right. So many factors, but if there were a way to help women to learn to breathe, that's one of the things that I do with all of my clients and my daughter as well. Just lay down and breathe. And laying down is already so therapeutic. But their issue is, oh, I don't have time. And I recognize that actually they don't. It's a crime. Feels so sad to hear that. And even from the moment of pregnancy to birth, they work. I know women who work up until the day before the baby is born.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And then after that, they have 2 weeks, sometimes three. 3 weeks feels like a holiday. And they're back to work. The baby is turned over to someone else. And the mother feels worry and concern all day because it is such an unnatural state to be in, not to be always with that newborn baby, and that skin to skin contact is broken. And then we're raising broken people, and they can't breathe properly either because of the lack of love and care, tenderness and closeness that was not present. Even though the mother loves her children, she does not have the time to give to them that each and every child born on this planet should have. And we can blame that on the system. The system should be there to support and help mothers and families so that the mother can be home. And how people cannot realize that this is the basic structure of society, being born in every household. And if it isn't set right in every single household, there cannot be a sane government. It was Lao Tzu who said, in order to put the world in order, put the household in order. In order to put the household in order, put yourself in order. And so that's an ancient saying that still applies to this day. I'm in a position where I observe my own daughter going through this difficult time, working 10 hours a day and with 2 small children, now as a single mother, because now divorce is so easy. It's an easy out. The door is always open. Bless her heart. I understand why it happened, but also the aspect of the broken home is another problem. So everybody's diaphragms are tight and squeezed because of the constant anxiety in the household. And that brings about emotional disorders in the children and the mother, and then the digestive problems come, and then comes the blood toxicity, and then that's very bad for the pelvic organs as well. And basically, because in and around and under the diaphragm is the abdominal brain. And that abdominal brain controls so many aspects. It thinks, it digests, it responds, just very much like the cerebral brain. So there's so much going on in the diaphragm and in the abdomen that basically it's kind of the seat of sanity and the seat of well-being as well. And that's also the solar plexus, as I'm sure we all know. And the solar plexus is where we store anxiety, fear, and frustration. And that's everybody. Everybody experiences that all the time. But the poor mothers of the world, I mean, my heart really breaks for them, because the way civilization has moved towards everybody works, everybody contributes, and now life is so expensive, people can no longer live on a one salary household like our parents did. My father was the one who worked and my mother stayed home. I just can't imagine coming home from school and your mother not being there. I can't imagine.
And in relation to that, the school hours now are from early in the morning till 2:30. So if a mother is working, then I mean, even if she was a school teacher, she might once have been home before the children. This makes it absolutely impossible. So they're all latchkey children, and they belong to the state rather than to their families.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which I approach strengthening the diaphragm is rather different, because it doesn't require any respiratory exercises. I look back to see what was in the way it was done, and it seemed to me that the gentle pressures that were caused by the movement of the fetal diaphragm on the blood vessels within the diaphragm, and later caused by the pressures of the infant as its body, when it was lying on its tummy, to gently raise and lower its body with breath, and by the movement of its arms and legs, because the arms are attached to the rib cage, which is attached to the diaphragm. The legs are attached to the psoas muscle, which is attached to the diaphragm. So these were creating little pulses of blood through the diaphragm. So I began to develop light, gentle pressures. And I was saying, this is feeding the diaphragm. The diaphragm is an intelligent organ. If you nourish it better, it will be able to do more. It knows what it wants to do. And that, because, of course, the children I was working with couldn't do breathing exercises. But as I talked to the adults who had problems with their diaphragms, they would say, well, they may have gone to yoga or Tai Chi or Pilates and tried to do breathing exercises. But of course, because of the lowered blood supply within the diaphragm, it was not responsive. And the habituated form of breathing with the upper chest still dominated. So they were kind of despondent about that and gave up trying. But these light, gentle pressures can be applied by an exhausted mother when she's in bed at night.
Right.
If she ever does sink down in front of the television, she can do it. She could do it a little bit at an office desk. It's available to her wherever she is. And it really, you see such a difference. How I took a lot of photographs of children with cerebral palsy who, when I first photographed them, were like this or like that. And now that, because it's also the main postural muscle, sitting up. And of course, if your diaphragm isn't functioning properly and your pelvis isn't open properly, it isn't allowing the blood to reach your toes and come back properly, then it's going to further compound your problem if you have a developmental problem such as cerebral palsy.
Absolutely. It goes to hemodynamics and homeostasis. If you have proper hemodynamics, and the diaphragm is so important because it's right in the middle, and the major vessels go through it. I developed a type of self-care for people to do, just like you just expressed. I also include that self-care. Every client of my students and every client in my clinic learns to do the self-care, starting with the diaphragm. And the very first movement is just this. Very, very gentle, right over what I call the abdominal brain, just between the rib cage under the xiphoid process. And there we stay for 9 long, slow circles. And then we move to stretching the diaphragm, gently pulling it down on the middle, and then going over under the rib cage and pulling to the belly button. And we do 30 strokes there. And then 30 strokes below, like a mirror, in the opposite way, by the pelvis pulling up and the diaphragm pulling down. And I tell you, that is one way that we have resolved infertility, how we have resolved chronic menstrual pains, also lack of menstruation, too much menstruation, and scanty menstruation, backache as well, because as you know, the diaphragm attaches all the way down to the third lumbar. I remember stretching someone's diaphragm externally, and I heard the third lumbar snap into place. Yeah. So, the diaphragm is essential. How many people completely overlook it, even if they don't even know where it is?
No.
They don't know where it is. Can't get a picture of it either. In fact, that it's like an upside down walnut shell with these apertures going through it, and it attaches all around the ribs and all the way down to the lower part of the spinal column as well. It's really quite fascinating, but it is the most essential part of the human body for homeostasis and hemodynamics, and that's everything.
And when you also speak about hemodynamics, um, the presence of oxygen and pressure are triggers that switch on genetic material in the cell. So all so closely connected. And why would a cell switch on any genetic material it happened to have if it wasn't getting any nutrition or any information? So you
Couldn't.
need that. And it just connects with everything.
Everything. You're so right. Everything. One of our practitioners deals exclusively with premature babies who have developmental issues. And that's all she does is our abdominal therapy. And her results are really astounding. The parents are so grateful, and the children begin to breathe properly. And then also their blood supply starts to function, hemodynamics functions. If you have hemodynamics, you have homeostasis. And then, the divine maker is back in charge. Otherwise, we're kind of wandering outside the normal gates of control by the divine mind that created all, which has it all in place to begin with.
What other areas of the body do you address, Rosita?
Well, because I'm a doctor of naprapathy, I also teach a posterior treatment, the back. So it's primarily abdominal, and then we turn people over, and then we look at the alignment of the sacrum with the lumbar vertebrae, and the lumbar vertebrae alignment with the thoracic. So we do a great deal, but most especially the sacrum, because most of our clientele are women, women with menstrual disorders and fertility challenges. And I find that if the sacrum, which is often damaged in early adolescence and childhood by falls, people who fall off of horses, people who do rollerblading, roller skating, ice skating, have falls. There are 1,000 ways that the sacrum can be injured and fall too far forward, and then that upsets hemodynamics and homeostasis. And so we must have good nerve function from the sacrum to the pelvic organs in order to have a healthy reproductive life. And then, of course, we must have good nerve function from the thoracic vertebrae to the diaphragm and the digestive organs for that to be normal as well. So I always tell my students, like, you could call, if your television set isn't working, but you didn't plug it in, you can call every repairman in the nation and nobody can help you. So the nerve supply at the spinal column is the plug in the wall, basically, for all human function. So yeah, I spend a lot of time teaching about sacral injuries, and most especially sacral injuries related to birth outcomes. I have a whole special master class that I teach called Sacral Injuries and Birth Outcomes. And we find that, for instance, I had a class of 16 women 2 years ago. 4 of those women had cesarean sections with very difficult long childbirths, very difficult, 32, 48 hours, and they all ended in cesarean surgeries. And they all had damaged, injured sacrums. In all cases, the sacrum was anterior, lots of scar tissue all around where the nerves exit, try their best to get to the anterior organs. So, yeah, sacrum is very important.
Okay, so on the abdominal side, you actually are very much focused on the diaphragm, and then you just described the spine issues. Linda, you've also got another therapy that might be interesting for people, is the crawling therapy, which is different than what people think. Could you talk a little bit about crawling therapy and how you've refined it and how you were able to, for instance, I saw you reverse dementia in an adult male. I mean, I witnessed it, and you attributed a lot of that to crawling.
Obviously, the baby manages to do this miraculous thing to develop its diaphragm and to enhance its circulation to make the necessary connections to the joints in its body from the initial state of being in a kind of bag of superficial fascia, which is very responsive, but means the whole body moves rather than the joints connecting in different coordinative patterns together. So I could see that when the infant is born, it's coming from a very compressed environment. Now it has to decompress, and the decompressing organ, of course, is the diaphragm. So I had heard that crawling was no longer considered to be central to optimum development. And I thought probably that must have been because children who apparently crawled on their bellies and all fours didn't seem to necessarily escape the neurological curses that had been put upon them. So I thought, presumably, the way the baby is crawling naturally is going to reveal a lot of information that hasn't been considered when the word crawling was used. So I began to both look at babies crawling and to adapt to those patterns myself. And I found very quickly that if, for example, you were crawling on your tummy and you had your arms placed out like this, which a lot of the children with neurological problems would do. So this is incredibly restrictive to your respiratory capacities, very uncomfortable, and breaks the connection between your elbow and your shoulder and opening out the shoulder and strengthening the base of the neck. I noted also that if the knees were bent in so that they curved diagonally inwards as opposed to having a nice right angle, which again moved the internal organs, the psoas muscle, the diaphragm made a big connection through the whole body, and looking at the various force fields, because I had read somewhere that motor development runs upon what was called in the book on motor development I happen to be reading by force. And so these forces had to connect in different patterns. And the children, which would, of course, bring both nutrition and connection in the brain as well. The whole thing would flow together. So I began to ask adults who came to me with various problems to crawl. And I even went as far as to show them how it was done. And to my great amazement, I found out that they couldn't do it properly. Some of them really didn't know when they got on the floor. They would drag the lower half of their bodies. Their arms would be sort of floundering out in all directions. Their bodies were very compressed. And that's a reflection of the fact that the movement of the diaphragm is not opening the musculoskeletal system from the inside, moving the fluids all the time. So nothing is going to be no stagnation to prevent the stagnation of the fluid. Gradually, as I began to very pernickety about the way in which they were crawling, but they rapidly found that the way in which I was teaching was actually much more comfortable and made the act, potentially pleasurable, as opposed to what they were trying to do, which was extremely effortful because it didn't make the connections. Everything was separated again. The units weren't connected, and they weren't connected to the breath. Now, previous to that, I had been teaching walking because I'd seen how poorly people walked, and that there was a way of walking that, again, operated every joint in the body from the heel, moved the diaphragm up and down, gave you energy while you were walking, so you could walk very long distances, which is what everybody once did. And I note that people also who tend to toe walk, then they're pulling themselves over with the superficial fascia on the front of the body, whereas if they put the heel down and rolled the foot, then all the internal organs start to move very nicely.
Mhm.
And so I played around with various exercises to help the students I was working with to find eventually a way of walking that they said, this is nice. It's a happy walk. And children used to walk like that. But
Mm.
studying children now, I don't see it. I don't see it because they don't go out and play in the same way. They're not free in the same way.
Right.
And they're stimulating the limbic system by all of this flight or fight responses on their computers and phones. So they don't see the broader picture. So not seeing the to focus on this. And now you've got everything going and moving, and you can move around with ideas and play with ideas, so you don't feel. But if you're like this, you also feel very threatened. If somebody says anything that is not to your liking, doesn't fit in with your tight little picture, then it becomes a threat. But if you're much more easy, you would say, "Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I can fit that somewhere." You know. So
Yes, it's the best thing for the brain for adults is crawling.
It seems to be the great integrator of the body and the mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense to me. Your brain has to respond to four limbs moving in unison and in harmony, like nature intended. If you just watch a horse walk, you really get an example of the beautiful symmetry of walking and crawling. That makes absolute sense to me.
Now, Rosita, you have is it still called the Abdominal Therapy Collective?
That's right.
Great. And how many members do you have now?
700.
Wow, that's a lot more than when I met you. Oh, that's good. Okay. So, Linda, Rosita has been able to create this collective of people who she's taught and then who go out and then teach on their own, I assume. Some of them become able to teach.
Yes. Yes. You should be teaching your techniques. You have a very, very unique and well thought out, well researched, well educated approach and explanation. Your work is definitely worthy of being preserved for the generations. So something you should think about.
We are thinking about it all the time. Bless you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for joining, Linda. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you.
It was absolutely lovely. I hope we meet again.
I hope so too.
It would be brilliant.